I always thought my daughter was the brightest part of my world. Even on the grayest mornings when the kitchen smelled like burnt toast and stale coffee, she would appear at the doorway with that wide, careless grin, holding a drawing or a half-finished story she wanted me to see. I would kneel, pretend I wasn't tired, and marvel at her imagination, the little world she built with crayons and colored pencils. I never imagined that the same hands that held mine so tightly could one day twist everything I cherished into something unrecognizable. I should have noticed the first signs, I suppose. A missing notebook here, a small lie there. Nothing that seemed threatening at the time, just little sparks that I chose to ignore because I didn't want to believe anything could taint the pure heart I thought I knew. My wife had been gone for years, and I leaned on her laughter and energy as if they were unshakable pillars. I wanted her to be happy, and I wanted to believe her happiness was in me. But as I would learn, even the closest bonds can hide shadows that grow quietly, silently, until they're too large to ignore. One chilly autumn afternoon, I found her in the living room, crouched over a small stack of papers. She froze when I walked in, the pencil she was holding trembling slightly. I remember the smell of the old carpet mixing with the faint hint of the crayons she used. There was a nervousness in the way she looked at me, and for some reason, I chalked it up to guilt over spilling something or forgetting a chore. I should have asked more questions, but I smiled and ruffled her hair. "Everything all right, kiddo?" I said, and she nodded too quickly, too firmly, as if she were trying to convince herself more than me. The first real twist came a few weeks later. A neighbor stopped by with a small complaint. Her words didn't make sense at first. Some minor misunderstanding, they said. Something about borrowed items and quiet disruptions. I brushed it off. She was just a kid, I told myself. Kids sometimes take things without thinking. But the neighbor's hesitation, the slight fear in her voice, lingered in my mind. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of lukewarm tea and listened to the house creak around me, realizing for the first time that maybe the small overlooked details were trying to tell me something I wasn't ready to hear. Days turned into weeks, and I started noticing patterns. Small things vanishing from my office, little fibs that seemed to grow in size when I questioned her, notes she would hide in the pages of books that didn't belong to her. Each time I confronted her, she smiled that same wide, innocent smile, and I wanted to believe it was all harmless. I wanted to trust her. But there was a tension in the air, like the quiet before a storm, and the feeling of unease clung to me, even as I tried to carry on as if nothing had changed. Then one evening, the real micro-twist hit me. I had been looking for an old family photo, one that I thought was lost during the renovations last year. It wasn't just misplaced, it was deliberately removed, folded neatly in her drawer. I remember the cold metal of the drawer handle in my hand, the faint perfume she sometimes wore lingering in the air, and a sinking realization that the boundaries of trust I had taken for granted were thinner than I'd ever imagined. My daughter had made a choice, though I didn't yet understand the full weight of it. She had crossed a line that no parent wants to think their child is capable of crossing. I decided to take a step back, quietly observing her in her world. Watching her laugh at the TV shows I loved, the way she arranged her books and toys with care, the moments when she would suddenly glance my way with that curious spark in her eyes. On the surface it seemed normal, ordinary, even sweet. But beneath it I could feel the pulse of something calculated, something hidden that she was nurturing in silence. I would later realize that those quiet, unassuming moments were the rehearsals for the betrayal that would shake the foundation of everything I had built. It wasn't sudden, not like in the movies, no dramatic confrontation at the door. It was quiet, gradual, like a shadow stretching across a sunlit room. One morning, I discovered that she had manipulated a situation at school to embarrass a classmate, then lied to protect herself. I felt a strange mix of anger, disbelief, and sorrow, all twisting together in my chest. I wanted to scold her, to demand an explanation, but I also needed to understand why. She was my child, after all, and I had loved her blindly. But love, I learned that day, doesn't always shield you from the consequences of your own trust. I remember sitting on the porch that night, the wind carrying the faint smell of rain and wet leaves, thinking about all the moments I had overlooked, all the small warnings I had dismissed. The quiet wisdom I began to understand was simple and brutal. Even the people you love most can harbor intentions you cannot predict, and sometimes protecting them doesn't prevent the heartbreak. I sipped my cold tea and let the truth settle around me like the evening fog. I knew that this story, the one I was living, would teach me something more than anger or resentment. It would teach me about resilience, about the hard lessons of trust, and about the quiet strength it takes to face someone you love when they turn against you. That's where we begin, right here, right now. Stay with me, because this story isn't just about betrayal. It's about the small moments that lead to the breaking point, and the subtle, heartbreaking choices that reveal the human heart in all its complexity. The truth isn't always comfortable, but it is always worth telling. The days that followed were heavy with a quiet unease. I noticed how she would pause slightly before answering questions, the way her eyes would dart to the corners of a room as if she were weighing her next move. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but I felt it in my bones. There was a rhythm to her behavior that didn't belong to a child. It belonged to someone who had learned to navigate shadows and keep secrets. I tried to convince myself it was imagination, that I was reading too much into innocent childhood cleverness, but deep down, I knew better. One afternoon, I caught her whispering to a classmate on the phone, her voice unusually low, careful, deliberate. There was a tension in her posture, a kind of confidence that didn't sit right with me. Later, I found scribbled notes tucked between the pages of her favorite storybook. Notes that weren't part of her schoolwork, but detailed plans and observations, like a private journal of her intentions. I remember the texture of the paper in my hand, the sharp smell of graphite from her pencil filling the air, and a sinking feeling that these weren't just the musings of a child. Something was brewing beneath the surface, something that I couldn't yet name but knew I would regret ignoring. I tried to reach her gently. I asked her about the notes, about the phone calls, about the strange tension I could sense in the house. She would smile at me, that same innocent, radiant smile, and say everything was fine, that I was overthinking. But every time she said it, the words felt hollow. The warmth I had always associated with her voice began to carry a shadow I couldn't shake. That was the second micro-twist, the realization that she was capable of deception, and that it wasn't born out of malice alone. It was born out of something more complex: ambition, curiosity, and the intoxicating power of control. One evening I found myself in the kitchen, the smell of simmering soup filling the air, when a message arrived from her school. A minor incident, they wrote, involving a small but deliberate act of mischief against another student. Nothing too serious, they reassured me, but they wanted to inform me as a precaution. My heart sank. I felt a strange mixture of pride and shame. Pride that she had the intelligence and cunning to orchestrate events, and shame that I hadn't seen it sooner, hadn't guided her better. I poured myself a cup of tea, the liquid lukewarm, and sat down at the table, realizing that the person I had loved blindly was growing into someone I didn't fully understand. That night, I confronted her, not with anger, but with questions. I wanted to know why. I wanted to reach the heart I had always believed was mine to hold. She looked at me, eyes wide, lips pressed into a line, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of vulnerability. But then she smiled again, charming, persuasive, and deflecting. She didn't admit anything. She simply shifted the conversation, redirecting my concern back onto mundane matters, as if nothing had happened. That was the cruel part. The betrayal wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet, meticulous, and almost invisible to anyone who wasn't paying close attention. The next day brought another small, sharp shock. I found that she had subtly manipulated a situation with a neighbor, taking something minor and twisting it so that she appeared innocent while the neighbor felt at fault. I could see the satisfaction in her eyes, the same eyes that once sought only my praise. It hit me then that she was testing boundaries, seeing what she could get away with, and using her charm as armor. My stomach twisted in ways I hadn't expected. This was no longer a series of harmless childhood mistakes. This was deliberate, calculated, and it cut deeper than any outright confrontation ever could. I spent that evening walking the quiet streets near our home, the damp air carrying the smell of wet leaves and the distant hum of traffic. I tried to reconcile the image of the little girl I had raised with the sharp, calculating presence she now projected. How could someone so familiar suddenly feel so foreign? I thought about the years I had spent pouring love into her life, teaching her to read, to play, to understand the world with kindness. And now, every lesson I had given her seemed like a tool she could wield in ways I hadn't imagined. By the time the week ended, I realized that trust was no longer something I could take for granted. It had become fragile, something I had to approach with care, observation, and caution. The betrayal wasn't a single act. It was a series of choices, tiny and deliberate, that slowly undermined the bond we had shared. And yet, in the quiet moments, when she leaned against my shoulder or asked for a bedtime story, I could still see traces of the child I had loved blindly. That made it all the more complicated, more painful. Love and betrayal intertwined, impossible to separate completely. That's the point where the story deepens, the tension builds, and the truth begins to demand confrontation. There are moments in life when the people we cherish most reveal a part of themselves we cannot ignore, and the choices we make in response define who we are as much as who they are. I sat on the porch that night, feeling the weight of that lesson settle like the chill in the autumn air. I knew that the path ahead would test me in ways I hadn't anticipated, and that the daughter I loved blindly had already begun shaping a reality I could no longer control. I wish I could tell you that things settled down after that a few honest conversations fixed the cracks forming between us. But life doesn't hand out easy resolutions, not when the wound is still forming and the truth hasn't fully shown its face. Part of me still hoped she would snap out of it, that whatever shadows she was dancing with would fade on their own. But hope can be a dangerous thing. It blinds you, softens you, keeps you from seeing what's standing right in front of you. The moment everything shifted began on a cold Thursday morning. I remember the house smelled like old wood and the faint lemon scent of the cleaning spray I'd used the night before. She was sitting at the table, tapping her fingers lightly, her notebook open in front of her. Not the school notebook. The other one. The one she thought I didn't know about. I asked her what she was working on, and she shut it so quickly the sound echoed through the room. A sharp slap of paper and cardboard that made something inside me tighten. "Just homework," she said. The lie slid off her tongue too smoothly. That was when I realized she'd grown practiced at it. I let it pass. Not because I believed her, but because I wanted to see what she would do next. There's a kind of quiet truth that shows itself when you stop pushing and start watching. And God help me, what I saw in the days that followed made my heart heavier than I knew it could be. I discovered she'd been visiting the neighbor's house without permission. Not just visiting, she had been telling stories, little invented tragedies about our home, about me, things designed to tug at sympathy and paint herself as a misunderstood angel. The neighbor, bless her heart, didn't know what to do with the conflicting images, the sweet girl with the big eyes, and the unsettling tales she poured out like confessions. When she finally told me, she did it hesitantly, the way someone does when they think they're hurting you by speaking. I stood there in her doorway, listening, the smell of old dust filling the space between us. My daughter had been twisting reality, bending it to see what reactions she could control, what strings she could pull. It shook me. Not because she was lying, children lie, but because her lies had architecture, purpose, direction. Still, the real blow came later. One evening I walked past her room and heard rustling, papers flipping, a soft mutter under her breath. I hesitated at her door. I don't like spying, never have. But I knew something was wrong, deeply wrong, and pretending otherwise wasn't helping either one of us. I pushed the door open gently, expecting her to hide whatever she was doing. She didn't. She just looked up at me with that calm, almost unsettling stillness. Her notebook was spread open on the floor, and for the first time she didn't try to protect it. She let me see. It wasn't drawings, it wasn't a diary, it was a map of our house. Every room, every cabinet, notes scribbled in margins, who visited, what time I woke up, when I left for groceries, when I was on the phone, patterns of my movements, observations about my habits, my routines, my weaknesses. It looked like something a detective might build, or someone preparing for a test that had nothing to do with school. I felt my breath catch as if the air in the room had turned colder. "What is this?" I asked, my voice softer than the storm rising inside me. She shrugged, as if it didn't matter, as if this wasn't a blueprint of my life arranged by my own child. "It's just something I'm working on," she said, "for fun." Fun. That word hit me like a punch. I could tell she believed it too, or had convinced herself she did. But behind her eyes there was something else, something flickering and restless. Curiosity, yes, but also control. A desire to understand the world by bending it to her will, even if that world was me. I picked up one of the loose pages. The texture was crisp, the pencil strokes dark where she'd rewritten things several times. Under a column labeled morning, she had written, "He always checks the mail before making coffee." Under bedtime, she had written, "He rarely locks the hallway cabinet." I felt exposed in a way I can't fully explain, vulnerable. Not because she meant to harm me, not yet, but because she had been studying me as if I were a puzzle to solve, not a father to love. I asked her why she felt the need to catalog my life like that. And for the first time in weeks, her confident mask cracked. Just a little, but enough for me to see something raw underneath. "I just wanted to understand things," she whispered. "People don't always tell the truth. I wanted to know for myself." That was the moment my heart broke, not from betrayal alone, but from the realization that something inside her had shifted, quietly and profoundly, and I had missed it. Fear had carved a small shelter inside her, and she was using control to fill the empty spaces. But even then, even in that quiet confession, there was still a piece missing. A truth she hadn't said yet. A truth I could feel waiting in the air like a storm that hadn't yet touched the ground. And before the night was over, I found it, a message on her tablet. A conversation she'd been having for weeks. Not with classmates, not with neighbors, with someone older, someone who fed her fears, validated her doubts, shaped her thoughts in ways she didn't yet understand. Someone who told her I was hiding something from her. That was the moment the betrayal turned real. The moment everything I thought I knew about our life began to unravel. I sat there in the dim glow of the screen, the house silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator, and realized that my daughter's deception wasn't born from nothing. She had been guided, and the person guiding her had every intention of tearing our bond apart. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table with the tablet in front of me, the dim screen casting a sickly glow across the room. The refrigerator hummed, the clock ticked, and every ordinary sound in the house felt like a reminder of how deeply things had gone wrong without me noticing. I kept scrolling through the messages, even though each new line carved a deeper ache in my chest. Whoever this person was, they knew exactly what they were doing. Planting ideas, feeding doubts, praising her intelligence, encouraging her to question everything I said and every move I made. It wasn't just manipulation. It was grooming her mind into believing she was alone, misunderstood, and that I was an obstacle rather than a father. The worst part was seeing how eagerly she responded, how hungry she was for someone who validated the storm inside her. She wasn't just participating. She was invested. She had opened a door, and this stranger had walked right in. I felt something heavy settle in my stomach, the kind of weight that tells you life just shifted in a way you can't undo. The next morning, I moved through the house like I was walking underwater. Every sound felt distant. She sat at the table with her cereal, humming softly, tapping her spoon rhythmically. The normalcy of it all made my skin prickle. I watched her for a long moment, trying to see the child I remembered. The one who once grabbed my hand at the grocery store because she was afraid of getting lost in the aisles. The one who used to fall asleep on my chest, listening to the soft rumble of my breath. But all I could see was a wall between us, one I didn't know how to climb. She caught me staring and raised an eyebrow. "What?" she asked. I wanted to reach across the table, hold her face in my hands, and tell her I loved her more than I loved my own heartbeat. But the words felt trapped behind the truth I'd uncovered, and love alone wasn't going to fix what had been broken. "Nothing," I said softly, "just thinking." She shrugged and went back to her cereal, swinging her feet under the chair, little movements that reminded me painfully of the child she used to be. Later that afternoon, while she was in her room, I made a decision that I didn't feel ready for but knew I had to face. I called the school counselor. I asked if she'd noticed any changes in my daughter's behavior. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. That pause hurt more than any words could. "Yes," she finally said. "She's been distant, guarded, and she's been telling some troubling stories about things happening at home." My heart fell deeper. "Stories?" I asked quietly. The counselor exhaled slowly. "Things that don't align with reality, Harry. Things that sound like someone is influencing her perception." I thanked her and ended the call, but her words stayed with me. Influencing her perception. That was exactly it. My daughter had started to build a version of reality where I was the villain, and someone else was guiding the narrative. I realized then that this betrayal wasn't about anger or rebellion. It was about trust that had been redirected, stolen from me, and given to someone who wanted to shape her into something new. I sat on the porch that evening, the air cold enough to sting my lungs. The smell of distant wood smoke drifted in from a neighbor's house, blending with the damp scent of winter leaves. I tried to piece everything together: the notes, the lies, the late-night whispers, the meticulous journal of my habits. Every thread pointed to the same truth. She had been preparing for something, testing boundaries, planning something she didn't fully understand. The micro-twist came when I walked back inside. She was standing at the hallway cabinet, the one she thought I never locked, the one she had written about in her notes. She froze when she saw me, her hand still hovering near the handle. For a second, her face flickered with guilt, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "I was just looking for batteries," she said calmly. I stepped closer. "You know that's not where the batteries are." Her eyes narrowed just slightly. A tiny movement, but it told me everything. She was measuring me, calculating, deciding what version of me she needed to respond to. A strange kind of calm washed over me then. Not anger, not fear. Something quieter. The kind of calm you get when you realize the ground beneath you has already collapsed, and all that's left is deciding how you're going to land. I walked past her, opened the cabinet myself, and pulled out the small latch box where I kept old letters and personal papers, things she had no reason to search for. I set it on the table, looking at her carefully. "Is this what you were looking for?" I asked. Her silence was answer enough. She didn't look afraid. She looked curious, as if this were another test, another moment to observe me. She tilted her head slightly, studying me the way she'd been studying everything else. "Why do you care what I look at?" she asked. That question cut deeper than any accusation, because it wasn't hostile or angry. It was genuinely confused, as if she had already convinced herself that crossing boundaries was acceptable, as long as she had a reason. "Because I'm your father," I said softly. "Because trust matters." She didn't respond. She just blinked, then turned and walked back to her room without a word, leaving me alone with the latchbox and a truth I didn't want to accept. The house felt colder after that. Even when the heater clicked on, blowing warm air through the vents, the warmth didn't reach my bones. I sat at the table for a long time, staring at the box and thinking about how far we'd drifted, how quietly it had happened, how I had missed the turning point until it was too late. But here's the hard part, the part that doesn't fit neatly into any lesson or moral. I still loved her. I loved her fiercely, even as she unraveled the fabric of our life, even as she trusted a stranger more than she trusted me, even as she crossed lines I thought were unbreakable. Love doesn't disappear when someone betrays you. It just becomes heavier, something you carry instead of something that carries you. And I knew then that the final confrontation was coming. Not the explosive kind you see in movies, something quieter, more dangerous. A moment where the truth would stand between us like a wall, and we would both have to decide whether to climb it or walk away from it forever. The night before everything changed, I sat alone in the dim light of the living room. The clock ticked softly. The house breathed around me, and I whispered to myself the question I had been avoiding since the beginning. How do you save someone who doesn't want to be saved? Tomorrow would give me the answer, or break me trying. I spent weeks trying to gather myself after that storm of betrayal, but I will be honest with you. Some wounds do not close cleanly. They stay open just enough to sting when the weather changes or when a memory walks through the door. After everything came out, After every hidden plan and quiet sabotage was finally laid bare, the house felt different. Not quieter, not emptier. Different, like someone had rearranged the air itself. You know what I mean. There are moments in life when the silence around you changes shape. It is not peace, and it is not sorrow. It is the space where trust used to live. I tried to go back to routines. My morning coffee, my little walk around the block. Reading the paper, even though half of it feels like a circus these days. But no matter what I did, my mind always drifted back to my daughter and that look in her eyes the day everything broke open. Not guilt, not regret. Just a strange, uncomfortable mixture of fear and pride. Like she was terrified to lose me, but too stubborn to admit she had crossed a line she could not uncross. Some nights I sat at the kitchen table long after midnight, staring at the same cup of tea I never drank. I kept asking myself the same question over and over. Where did I go wrong? Was it something I did, or something I failed to do? But the truth is never one simple answer. Family breakage is like a cracked window. One small pressure point spreads into a web of fractures. A few days after the confrontation, my daughter came by the house. She did not knock at first. She just stood outside, hands stuffed into her pockets, rocking back and forth like she was trying to choose between running away or walking inside. I almost opened the door for her, but something inside me said, let her decide. Sometimes love has to stop holding out its arms long enough for the other person to reach on their own. She finally knocked. Soft. Too soft for someone who had torn through my trust like a storm. When I opened the door, she could not lift her eyes. She looked smaller, thinner, tired in a way that only guilt can make a person look. Dad, she said, just that one word, Dad, and I swear to you it almost broke me all over again. We sat in the living room. Not close, not far, just enough distance to breathe. She started talking, slowly at first, about how she had felt pressured, trapped, jealous, angry, confused. About how she had wanted to prove something to herself, to others. About how she did not realize how deep her choices were cutting until it was too late. I listened. Not because I wanted excuses, but because I needed to hear the truth in her voice. And I did. Not perfect truth? No. But the fragile kind. The kind a person offers when they do not know how to fix what they broke. She cried. I held my breath. Then she said the one thing I had been waiting for without even knowing it. I never wanted to lose you. And there it was. The crack, the opening, the small doorway back to something we could maybe rebuild. I told her I loved her. I told her I always had. But I also told her the truth she needed to hear. The truth parents sometimes avoid because we want to protect our children from the weight of their own mistakes. Love does not erase consequences. Trust has to be earned back, not handed over like a spare key. She nodded. She did not argue. She did not make promises she could not keep. She just sat there, letting the weight settle, letting the truth do what truth does best, clean the wound enough for healing to start. She stayed for an hour, maybe two. When she left, she hugged me. Not the quick, distracted hug she had given me in recent years. This one was different. It held fear and hope and apology all at once. After she walked out, the house felt lighter. Still wounded, still tender, but lighter, like a window had finally been opened. We are not perfect now. We are not magically healed. We talk more. We try harder. Some days are good. Some are awkward. Some feel like walking over thin glass. But we are trying, and sometimes trying is the bravest thing a family can do. Let me leave you with this, friend. Betrayal does not have to be the end of the story, but it will be if no one is willing to do the hard work of rebuilding. Sometimes the person who hurt you still loves you. Sometimes they just need to face themselves before they can face you. And sometimes, forgiveness is not softness. It is strength. The kind you find after surviving something that should have broken you. If you ever go through something like this, remember one thing. Love is not blind. Love sees everything and chooses what is worth fighting for. Now, take a breath with me, because the next story I will tell you, well, it carries another truth people rarely want to admit. But it is one I lived myself. Do you want to hear it?